Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Israeli warplanes launched strikes against terrorist targets in the Gaza Strip on Sunday. Those attacks came after terrorists inside Gaza fired 2 missiles that landed off the coast of central Israel.
Hamas knows exactly what buttons to push to ignite a war with Israel. Their ultimate goal remains to wipe out the Jewish nation from the face of the earth. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
The Israel Defense Forces said it struck rocket manufacturing sites and Hamas military targets in Gaza. The strikes mark only the second incident between Hamas and Israel since a ceasefire ended an 11-day war last May. One expert examined that conflict and tells CBN News what you heard about the causes may not be so accurate. During that war, Hamas fired more than 3,000 rockets into Israel. Israel's Iron Dome shot down about 90% of those rockets, while the IDF responded with surgical strikes against the terror group's military infrastructure inside Gaza. Jonathan Schanzer writes in his new book, Gaza Conflict 2021, that much of the media covering the war got it wrong.
A lot of people talk about fake news. I'm not sure that applies here. I'm not even sure that the word bias applies here. The problem was it was almost as if the West and the Middle Eastern media, and I would actually say that includes Israeli media as well as Arabic media, it seemed like they were covering 2 different wars entirely.
The majority of those reports stated the war began over disturbances on the Temple Mount and a real estate dispute in a Jerusalem neighborhood.
That was all over the Western press, but yet people just decided to ignore the fact that Palestinian elections were canceled and the Hamas was angry and looking to make a splash, and that's exactly what they did by launching the war. People forget, they talk about how angry they are at Israel when it responds to these rockets, which, by the way, these are provocations by Hamas. Israel's responses are almost entirely defensive in nature.
Schanzer says much of the media also failed to mention Hamas's covenant to destroy Israel, their violent beliefs, and main funding source, Iran.
How much it has invested financially in Hamas, how much is it invested in the rockets, in the mortars, in the tunnels, in all of the weaponry that we saw used during this conflict. People sort of guess or think that somehow Hamas builds up this arsenal organically. That is not what happens. They get it from specific sources, and it usually tracks back to the Islamic Republic in Tehran.
Given the mainstream media support for creating a Palestinian state, many news outlets fail to recognize that Hamas is a tyrannical organization dominating the people of Gaza.
They have no freedom. And meanwhile, Hamas continues to divert all of the building materials and other resources that come in for the benefit of the people of Gaza. They divert that toward the war machine. So they say that they're fighting on behalf of the Palestinian cause, but meanwhile leave 2 million people in utter misery, subjecting them to the whims of the Hamas leadership, who periodically decide to fight Israel with almost certain knowledge that they're going to lose the war, but they wage it for public relations gains.
Schanzer says recent terror attacks inside Israel, inspired by Hamas, signal an attempt to push Israel into another military conflict, a war Schanzer believes might not be too far away.
When you talk to Israeli officials, they'll tell you that Gaza is still on a knife's edge. Hamas always has the ability to take things from calm to war in a very rapid fashion. That is the concern. Hamas knows exactly what buttons to push, whether it's attacks against civilians, whether it's rockets on Jerusalem or rockets on Israel's very populated Mediterranean coast, the center waistline of Israel, as they call it. These are things that Hamas knows if they want to spark a war, they can. So the question is, how much longer will calm hold?
Well, Chris Mitchell is with us now from Jerusalem for more on this story. So, Chris, it's been 8 months since the last war between Israel and Hamas. What has Hamas been doing since then?
Well, Gordon, earlier today, I talked to the IDF spokesman about the strike inside Gaza. You can get this from other sources as well. What they're doing, they're rebuilding, getting ready for the next war. They're investing in its military infrastructure. That means they're adding to their rocket and their missile arsenal that was depleted during the war back in May, and diverting materials to its war machine. That means concrete that could have gone to schools, homes, hospitals is going underground into tunnels and the bunkers. Just recently, they had a training exercise. You could see it on video. They were just training to kidnap Israeli soldiers and come against Israeli military infrastructure. So in short, when you add all that up, Gordon, right now, Hamas is just working towards their goal of destroying Israel. As we said in that report, it has a covenant to destroy the Jewish state.
Well, let's talk about the rockets that were launched. What kind are they, and what's the significance of the range?
Well, the range is getting more and more right now, Gordon. They're getting more precision-guided missiles, not like they do in Hezbollah up on the northern border, but it's very concerning. They can reach Tel Aviv. They can reach here in Jerusalem, and that's the concern of many. And as they get more and more of these missiles, and they get more precision-guided missiles, that's really a game changer for Israel, Gordon, and especially if they get more technology, drone technology as well from Iran, which has sophisticated drones. All that is just added to the military infrastructure that poses a threat not only to southern but central Israel right now.
Well, how are they getting the weapons? Israel's got a blockade. Egypt has joined in that blockade, trying to keep weapons out of Gaza. So how are they getting them through?
One of the routes they used to have was through Sudan, and now that the Abraham Accords, Sudan has actually joined the Abraham Accords. That has been sealed off, but they do have their technology inside. And as we saw in the strike on Sunday, they tried to hit some of the rocket manufacturing sites. So some of it's internal. How they get all of this in is smuggled in perhaps through the Sinai. It's not necessarily a completely sealed border, but some of that technology and some of those weapons are still getting into Gaza.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the history of Gaza. It was sort of a headquarters for the Philistines back in Bible times, and then Ezekiel's famous prophecy from chapter 25 that it would be wiped out, that all that occurred. And now it seems to be reemerging as an enemy of Israel, if you can call reemerging over the past couple of decades. So tell us about the recent history of Gaza. What was it like?
Well, if you go back about 40 years, Gordon, you could see it's actually a beautiful place down there. Gaza has beautiful beaches. Earlier today, I talked to the former Israeli ambassador to Egypt. He said back in 1980, he used to travel through Gaza. So from, say, 1980 to the mid-1990s, you could go to restaurants, you could buy goods. I've heard this from Israelis for years. Many of them would go down to the Gaza Strip. Many of the people in Gaza would go up to Tel Aviv. And so it was a far different picture than we have right now. Now, all that started to change recently, I would say, with the Oslo Accords, another Accords, but they have a far different history than the Abraham Accords. That's when the PLO took over by Yasser Arafat. He took over Gaza. What did he do? He started calling for jihad against Israel. More terror attacks came out of Gaza. Now, that changed dramatically in 2005 when Israel completely pulled out of Gaza, what's called the so-called engagement. Gaza at that time was promised to be like a Singapore. 2 years later, in 2007, Hamas took over from the Palestinian Authority. So that was the reign of Hamas that we see now. So 4 wars later from 2007, we're now waiting for the next one.
All right. Well, Chris, thanks for the insight. Thanks for the report from Jerusalem.